South Africa has the unfortunate reputation of being the country with the third highest rate of serial killers in the world, only preceded by the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Over the past century, 112 active serial killers were convicted in South Africa, which effectively means at any given time in the country's history, there has been one or more active serial killers within the borders of the country. Of all the prolific serial killers who claimed the southern tip of Africa, with its magnificent beaches, towering mountain ranges and abundant fauna and flora, there is one, the man who brought home to citizens that monsters don't have green scales, fangs, and hide in your nightmares. The scariest monsters might be your neighbor, your fellow church member, or even your own father. This story is ingrained in the history of South Africa and to this day serves as a cautionary tale, and so, let's jump into one of the most shocking cases the city of Pretoria is bound never to forget. During the period 1988 to 1989, the cities of Pietermaritzburg, Johannesburg and Pretoria were in a state of continuous terror, since 6 young girls between the ages of 9 and 16 seemed to have vanished without a trace. Police launched a frantic search, but due to the lack of information and evidence, the missing girls seemed to have disappeared like mist before the sun. On the 1st of August, 1988, Tracy Lee Scott Crosby, aged 14, from Randburg disappeared from the Cresta shopping center. She was last seen entering a Volkswagen Beetle, but no other information was available. Her brother, who originally would have accompanied her, would struggle with his choice not to join her for many years afterwards, and in a bizarre twist, he was years later convicted of beating a farm worker unconscious and then throwing the limp man's body to the lions to feed. The conviction was later overturned, but Tracy's brother was just one of the unknown victims whose lives were scarred by an evil that would leave more questions than answers in its wave of terror. On the 22nd of December, 1988, 12-year-old Fiona Harvey from Pietermaritzburg disappeared, on her way to the corner shop to buy some milk for her mother. Witnesses would recall a white truck with Van Rooyen Building Contractors written on the side of the vehicle. Police would not immediately relate the abduction to the cases in Pretoria and surrounding area, but it would later emerge that the suspects spent time, not only in Gauteng, but also the coastal resorts of KwaZulu-Natal. Sadly, her body is one of the 6 disappeared girls whose bodies were never found, and the only clue to what might have happened to Fiona was the witnessing of the pickup truck with the company logo. On the 7th of June, 1989, 9-year-old Joan Horn was abducted on her way to school, never to be seen again. Once again, police had no clues to follow up. Detectives were becoming frustrated with the mounting case files which seemed to be connected, although how they were connected seemed elusive. Pretoria was the capital of the country and known as one of the friendliest cities for students. It was also during the apartheid era that the crimes occurred, and suburban middle-class white folks were not prepared for the darkness that was not meant to happen behind white picket fences. The danger seemed not to belong amongst looming jacaranda trees and manicured gardens. During July 1989, 16-year-old Janet Delport from Pietermaritzburg would be found wandering around in a drugged daze, after she was reported earlier in the day as missing. Due to the drugs in her system, or perhaps because she would have a psychological block on her memory of the time she was abducted, she could offer police no information about the abduction. Only later, Janet would realize, as the story of the 6 missing girls would unfold, regardless of what had happened during those missing hours, she was one of the lucky ones to escape. 9-year-old Rosa Peel would however disappear a couple of weeks later. Police by now were well aware of the modus operandi of the perpetrator, and despite the fact that there was not a single piece of evidence to link Rosa's abduction to the others, detectives believed they were looking for the same man. Soon afterwards, Odette Boucher, aged 13, and Anne-Marie Wapenaar, aged 11, would together be abducted on their way to school on the 22nd of September, 1989. On the 29th of September, 1989, Anne-Marie's mother would receive a letter from Anne-Marie, saying that she and Odette had ran away to the coast with some boys. Since the content was completely out of line with her daughter's personality, Anne-Marie's mother took the letter to the detective in charge and both agreed that the letter was written under duress. The abductor or abductors were becoming brazen. All the kidnappings took place in broad daylight and in public places such as shopping centers. Still, the teams of detectives who dedicated all their time, energy, and resources to catch a predator had practically no information, no leads, and it was as if 6 young girls just vanished without a single trace. Detectives were especially concerned with the escalation of the number of abductions. The time between kidnappings became less, and openly taking 2 girls in daylight indicated to police that the culprit was very good at what he did, highly intelligent and a pure psychopath. Very little was known as far as serial murderers and predators of serial offenders, but police knew from previous international cases that the escalation in part was not a good sign. It is an unfortunate barometer, but the faster the escalation, the more likely the perpetrator would make more mistakes. Police could not understand how the abductor, who according to the psychological profile was definitely a white male, could not only get away with his crimes, but do it almost effortlessly. Yolanda Wessels was very familiar with the house at 227 Malherbe Street. It was the home of her aunt, Franzina Johanna Haarhoff, better known as Joey's home. On the afternoon of the 22nd of December, 1989, she left her home to visit with her aunt, also never to be seen again. Detectives interviewed Haarhoff, but she would later be described as a harmless, friendly old lady, eager to assist in the disappearance of her niece. Little did they know or even suspect that they were speaking to one half of the most notorious international serial killer couples in the world. Friends and family would later describe Haarhoff as a gentle soul, always pleasant and soft-spoken, and that the change in her only came after she fell in love with Cornelius Gerhardus van Rooyen, known as Gert. Many believed she was seduced by van Rooyen, who seemed short, with a slight hunch and not very attractive in comparison with the vivacious and good-looking younger woman. It is however difficult to consolidate this impression with the woman who repeatedly and willingly lured girls to her car, including her own flesh and blood, with the gentle-natured woman people described. Love could not possibly be that blind. It is more likely that, like her lover, Haarhoff acted the part of a respectable housewife, which image she successfully portrayed to the world very well. The 11th of January, 1990 was a beautiful summer's day in Pretoria, capital city of South Africa. 16-year-old Joan Booyens was late for her connecting bus to her high school, which would be another quarter of an hour of waiting. Joan had hardly been standing at the bus stop at Church Square, when a friendly, blonde, middle-aged woman stopped next to her and asked what school she was attending. Joan told her, and when the woman offered to take her to her school, Joan didn't hesitate. Joan was aware of stranger danger, but this lady could have been the mother of any of her friends. Once in the car, the conversation flowed comfortably. The woman asked if Joan would mind if they could stop at her house to let her people know she was taking Joan to school. Joan did not mind, and soon they pulled into the driveway of a neat home in one of the leafy suburbs of Pretoria. The woman entered the house but came out minutes later and asked Joan if she would mind waiting inside, since no one was at home. Joan obliged. Once inside, she noted how tidy the house was. Most of the doors in the house were closed, but she saw school uniforms from different schools on a bed and asked the woman, whose name was Joey Haarhoff, whose clothes the items were. Haarhoff told Joan the uniforms belonged to her children, and she was planning on donating the items. Once in the master bedroom, Joan turned around to find Haarhoff had vanished and instead the menacing figure of a man, who she later described as having devilish eyes, was grabbing her and forcing her to kiss him. Utterly shocked and repulsed, Joan fought back. The man, who would later be identified as Gert van Rooyen, punched her in the face, and by the time Joan had regained her focus, she found she was staring down the barrel of a gun. As van Rooyen lifted her from the bed with a headlock, Haarhoff entered with a handful of pills, stockings, handcuffs, tape, and a glass of water. The magnitude of her situation and the realization that this kind woman was not going to help her hit her at once. Joan was forced to drink the tablets. She was tied up, gagged, after which Van Rooyen proceeded to sexually assault her. She was then locked up in a closet, where she lost consciousness for a while. It is important to note that Joan was small for her age and that Van Rooyen usually abducted younger victims. Joan immediately started loosening her bindings and managed to open the closet door. The drugs she had been forced to drink had not completely worn off, but despite being terrified, she knew she had to escape. Fortunately, Haarhoff was in the backyard, completely unaware of her abductee's escape. Joan made it to the front door, always alert for any other signs of the man who had molested her, and by pure luck, found the front door open. Dazed and confused, she made her way to the street, but Haarhoff noticed her escaping and ran after her, chasing her in the street. A random motorist stopped and looked at the frantic, disheveled girl, who, with a pair of handcuffs still attached to her one arm, jumped into his motor car. Joey told the driver that they should take the situation to her residence instead of sorting it out in the street. Joan pleaded with the motorist and would not let go of his arm. Through a river of tears, she begged the Samaritan to not take her back to the house. Fortunately, the kind man promised the frightened girl not to, and they immediately made their way to the nearest police station. She was still so heavily under the influence of the narcotics that she had to be carried into the police station. Once inside, her invaluable statement would finally give the task team from across South Africa not one, but two names to the monsters who had been terrorizing the suburban streets of SA. The escape of Joan Booyens would lead investigators to what the press dubbed the House of Horrors. After getting Joan's statement, the task team immediately headed for the home Joan identified, but their suspects, who they by now had been identified as Joey Haarhoff and Gert Van Rooyen, had clearly made a run for it. Apart from agreeing to maintain surveillance on the residence, a massive manhunt started on the 11th of January, 1990. According to Haarhoff's daughter, Amore, her and her husband had returned home from Klerksdorp, after visiting family, on the 13th of January, 1990, to find the window near the front door had been broken. Amore would later, in her book about the tremendous abuse she had suffered under her mother, Joey, explain that she and her husband proceeded to enter the house. Van Rooyen and Haarhoff had appeared from the main bedroom, clearly half asleep, and through the ramblings, Amore could figure out that her mother and her mother's lover had kidnapped a child for ransom and that the child had escaped. Amore had no idea how dark the truth would eventually be and how it would cost her husband his job and cause them not only to lose everything they had worked for, but also caused an entire community to blame and resent the couple, despite the fact that their only relation to the crime is that Amore was related to Joey, who was one of the suspects. Little is known about where Gert and Joey were in the 5 days that followed Joan's kidnapping. They did hide for a night in Amore's home, as well as at Joey's sister's house, and records would later reveal that they went to KwaZulu-Natal, only to return to Pretoria a day later. Why the couple decided on the evening of the 15th of January, 1990 to return to their residence at 227 Marlurb Street, no one will ever know. According to Detective Inspector Don Chandler, who became involved with the case after Fiona Harvey was abducted, who would later, in a radio interview, tell a captive audience what he first had experienced. The moment the couple noticed the presence of police, they fled in Van Rooyen's white pickup truck and a short car chase ensued. Detective Chandler would testify that all police staff involved in the case were under strict instructions not to kill either of the occupants. As the white pickup truck crossed the creek that serves as unofficial border between Capitol Park and Pretoria West, both the left front and back wheels were shot out and the vehicle came to a grinding halt. Detective Chandler would later admit that he played the events that followed over and over in his head. He saw as Van Rooyen pulled Haarhoff's head down to the gear lever and saw as a shot was fired. Van Rooyen's door was locked, and before any of the police officers involved could act, he shot himself. Van Rooyen and Haarhoff had, according to a last will and testament found at their home, decided to make a suicide pact. Neither of them would ever be held accountable for the devastation they caused, and after their deaths, families were no closer to finding their children. At 227 Marlerb Street, police started collecting forensic evidence. Odette's prefect pin and Anne-Marie's schoolbag, as well as a piece of paper with her address written on it, would be found hidden under a carpet. The stationery on which the so-called letter of the missing girls had been written was also found. Still, despite turning the garden and house upside down in their search, no remains of the girls would be found. ABSA Bank would in May of 1990 donate the Van Rooyen house to the police, and a forensic team would systematically comb through every inch of the property, but hardly any new evidence would surface. There is not much available as far as the history of the duo, whose acts would leave broken families in its wake. Cornelius Gerhardus van Rooyen was born on the 11th of April, 1938. His first brush with the law was in 1954, during which he stole clothing, a firearm, and a vehicle. Subsequently, he was sent to a reform school. He married Orletta van Rooyen, and together they had 6 children. The marriage was, however, rocky, and they would eventually divorce. In 1979, Van Rooyen abducted 2 young girls aged 10 and 13 and drove them to the Hartbeespoortdam, where he forced them to strip and perform sexual acts on him. South Africa would, however, only implement their national register for sex offenders in 2007. It was therefore easy to hide the fact that he was a paedophile. Once he had fulfilled his sexual desires, he took them back to Pretoria. Consequently, the girls reported the crime, and Van Rooyen was sentenced to only 4 years jail time, but released early on good behavior. After his release, he successfully integrated himself back into the community and operated a building contractor business in partnership with his brothers, with some success. Joey Haarhoff entered his life somewhere during this time. There is very little as far as the history of the couple is concerned. To outsiders, Haarhoff and Van Rooyen were just an ordinary middle-aged couple, and even after suspicions at the police station were raised, the officers who went to investigate would return reporting that he met a harmless old lady and that absolutely nothing seemed untoward. After the event of the depravity was revealed, many felt that Haarhoff was perhaps under the influence of Van Rooyen and suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, during which a hostage falls in love with their capturer, but in a tell-it-all book by her daughter, Amore, in which she reveals that Joey physically, emotionally, and psychologically abused her own children from a very small age. Amore would remember laying in her cot and having punches rain down on her. When she was older, her mother would sneak into the room and punch her in the stomach while she was sleeping, for no apparent reason. Amore's father would also sexually abuse her from a very young age, and even after Amore's grandmother spoke to Joey, her mother would just pretend as if it did not happen. Amore struggled for years with the trauma and emotional scars left by the abuse, but nothing would prepare her for the shocking news that her mother, who only met Van Rooyen at the beginning of 1988, was an accomplice in one of the worst crimes South Africa had ever known. There was enough to link the couple to the disappearance of the 6 children, and not enough to give any indication of what might have happened to the victims. To the families, closure would remain elusive. Leads seemed to be single loose threads that seemed to unravel as soon as they were tugged. The family and friends of the victims would repeatedly have their hopes shattered by false leads, and 30 years later the mystery of the missing 6 girls remains a haunting unsolved puzzle. Detective Chandler never stopped searching for the girls, and even after retiring in 1996, he continued to follow up the thousands of leads and interviewing the thousands of witnesses. According to a radio interview in 2020, the human trafficking angle is a recent avenue that investigators are pursuing. Flippy van Rooyen, son of Gert van Rooyen, was arrested and found guilty of kidnapping and murdering a 15-year-old foreign national. He did receive the death penalty, which his father no doubt would have gotten, but the sentence was overturned when South Africa's constitution was rewritten and the death penalty abolished in 1994. While incarcerated, he frequently made bold, public statements about his father's and Haarhoff's activities. He told reporters that his father kidnapped more than 40 children. Flippy said that his father would originally kidnap black children, since authorities would in pre-apartheid era be much less likely to look for children who were not white. The human traffic angle has always been of concern, especially considering how much time Van Rooyen spent at the harbour. As a matter of fact, he was working for a shipping company. To hide the girls in containers and export them would have been easy in his position, but so far, all local and international leads have rendered no answers. Dock workers as well as cleaning staff have however confirmed later to police that Van Rooyen asked them frequently for children. During his many interviews in 1996, Flippy van Rooyen told reporters of high-ranking South African government and National Party members who were involved in clandestine meetings with his father, with the regards to obtaining underaged girls for sexual pleasure. Flippy has however discredited himself terribly, and in 2001, he was charged with lying about these allegations, and no one paid much heed to these statements, until Detective Inspector Mark Minnie and reporter Chris Steyn published their book The Lost Boys of Bird Island, in which many of the same charges were made and Van Rooyen's name definitely mentioned as a player in a national, clandestine paedophile trafficking ring. The book was however retracted, and Mark Minnie apparently committed suicide in 2019 under strange circumstances, once again leaving more questions than answers. There was never a trial, and Gert van Rooyen and Joey Haarhoff were never charged with any crimes. In light of all the witness statements and evidence, they were undoubtedly the mastermind of either a human traffic ring or they were kidnapping and disposing of children for their own sadistic reasons. The devastation the missing children caused would ripple through their families and touch every person in the country. Many of the missing 6 parents would divorce, and a couple hired psychics and private investigators, and in doing so, would grow deeper and deeper in debt. It's easy to understand the desire to be able to bury your child, in order for the grieving process to begin, but after so much time, thousands of witness statements and thousands of leads, only parents like Bouchers and retired detective Don Chandler still feel that intimate connection with the case that forces them to continue searching. Recently, after flattening the ground at the house at 227 Malherbe Street, a group of artists erected a wall of remembrance with the names of all 6 of the girls who vanished without a trace. A wall might seem cold comfort to a grieving parent, but the wall, which was erected in 2020, is perhaps the only way loved ones could find some form of memorial to their lost children. It might not be a gravestone, but it's a tribute to 6 little girls who might be gone, but will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching Shades of Evil Vlog, Episode 8, In Plain Sight. Please like, share and subscribe for my future true crime episodes.